Welcome to our next episode of Points on the Circle. In this episode, I had the opportunity to speak with one of our founding members, Harriet Rosenthal. Harriet grew up on the west side of Chicago, has been a longtime resident of Deerfield, and is its current mayor. She raised her kids there, who are now raising their kids there. I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Harriet Rosenthal, thank you for taking the opportunity to talk. This is one that I have been looking forward to doing. You know, as we tell everybody, that you were the first person that I met at Hakafah, officially, other than Rabbi Marks, back in 1998. So it's been a couple years. And as people know, when I talk about Hakafah, I talk about at our foundation, the people that made Hakafah are all the founders. But when it comes to understanding Hakafah, the places we had to go, the people we had to talk to were Jerry and Elaine Friedman and Harriet and Stan Rosenthal. So I want to start with a question, if I may, and that is, I want to go back to 1983, 1984. And I want to talk about the starting of Hakafah, but I don't want the history part of it. My question for you is, why would you start another synagogue? Given whatever reason you had for wanting to leave where you were, and this isn't about that. Why did you have a desire or a need to be in a place at all, or to start somewhere, something new?
That's a hard question to answer because we really had no intention of ever doing that. We left where we were and didn't even talk about what we were going to do next, where we were going to go. One of our children was already in college. The other one was going to be in her confirmation year, so we knew we had to do something. And we got a call from a couple of people that said, we've left Solel and we are worshiping in each other's homes. Would you join us? So we said, sure. And we did, and that's really the whole story. We just got sucked in, hooked. Oh, I shouldn't say sucked in, but hooked with the atmosphere and the congeniality and the warmth.
So was it the person side of it or the worship side that brought you to that first time?
I would say we felt an obligation to help those who were trying to do this. So it was the person side.
Yeah, but why? Because why did you feel the obligation?
Because we felt so bad as to what had happened. And we just felt that these people were looking for something, and we knew some of them well and some of them hardly. And so we thought, well, we'll try it. We'll see what it's all about. And as I said, we were hooked.
Why is it important for you to belong to a synagogue? And does Stan agree with that?
Stan agrees with it. I'm not sure he's the one who would have initiated it. But when I always belonged to a synagogue as a child. I grew up living next door to a synagogue.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And so my parents were very involved in it, and I was a part of it. I was one of the first women to be, or girls at the time, to be bat mitzvah. And of course, on a night when the Torah didn't come out, because it was a traditional synagogue. So I always had a strong Jewish identity. I didn't feel a need to, or we didn't feel a need to belong to a synagogue on our own when we first got married. We kind of went with my parents, or if we went to St. Louis, we went with Stan's parents for holidays. And when our kids got to the age where we knew it was time for them to start Sunday school, we did some research and joined a synagogue, and it was all me. And Stan just joined.
So, most of my seminal events or places that I have gone through Hakafah have had you involved somehow. if you consider that. We've been through a lot together, right? And the one thing I always come back to, and I mentioned this to you not too long ago, was when we went to the Czech Republic and to Hungary and then to Minsk. But the part that always sticks out to me when I think about it is we just landed in Prague. We got on the bus, and the tour guide takes us to the castle to go tour the castle area. It's rainy, I think, at the beginning. From what I remember, it was a little rainy. And we go for a walk through the alleyways, and we turn down to go where Kafka lived. You know what I'm going to talk about, right? This cracks me up, right? And Stan is nowhere to be found. Absolutely nowhere to be found. And we're taking a left, and he went straight. And I start going after him. And you're like, no, he'll find us. He'll find us, right? And you know what he did? What's that
He
about?
did.
How, is it like a homing device? What is that?
I mean, Stan is a wanderer. So, if it made me crazy, I'd be crazy all the time. So I just know, he'll show up.
Why'd you come with us on that trip?
Oh, it just sounded so intriguing and fascinating.
Yeah,
And it was every minute of it.
What sticks out 12, 13 years later?
Well, as one, our luggage being lost. That was a little traumatic.
Yes.
However, what really sticks out was the wonderful experiences in Prague, sharing them. And then, of course, the 2 days that we were in Lostysia and had our Torah there, and the people who came, and that choir of children that sang. That's something I'll never forget. And then visiting the castle outside of Lostysia and having another group singing Hebrew songs and playing the music. And it was so beautiful. So that really is what stood out for me. Hungary was a little bit of a letdown after Prague and Lostysia, but we got there. We got there, and it was great. And of course, Belarus Minsk was a totally different experience. And just being with the ghetto survivors that we had heard about for so many years and supported for so many years, and listening to their stories, and it was a once in a lifetime trip as far as I'm concerned.
When you think of meaningful Jewish experiences you've had in your life, what pops into your head, and what goes into a meaningful Jewish experience for you?
Well, being with my father in synagogue was always a very meaningful experience for me. I was the little girl who sat quietly next to him and braided the fringe on his tallis, and he would smile down at me as I was doing that. And so that's where I find him. That's where I feel close to him. And my mother and her sister and my grandmother cooking the holiday meals together, the three of them working in our kitchen. There was a galley kitchen about 2x4 with no freezers at the time, and just cooking all day, and the smells, and our family celebrated all the holidays together. And those were very meaningful Jewish experiences for me.
Talk a little bit about growing up on the West Side.
Well, I grew up in Austin. My elementary school was Emmett School, which was sort of the heart of the community where we lived. It was almost like a little suburb at the time. And it was very Jewish. And my elementary school, which was K through 8, on the Jewish holidays, there were like no kids in school because it was that Jewish. And there were 3 synagogues. Ours was traditional. There was a conservative synagogue, and there was a Reform synagogue, which I thought was a church at the time. How quickly we change. And it was a very close-knit community. Most of our relatives lived there. We were all within walking distance of each other. We grew up together with cousins and such. And then Austin High School was very different because it took in the greater Austin neighborhood. There was and at the time in Chicago, they had what they called permissive transfers. So for the Jewish kids living on the further east of the West Side, who would have gone to Marshall High School, they did everything they could to get into Austin because it was considered a better school. There was also a Greek Orthodox church in the community, so there were a lot of Greek kids in the school. It was very mixed, is what I'm trying to say. And it was a very different experience. I did not like high school at all.
Mm.
I was happy to leave.
Really?
And yeah, it was, I didn't feel that there wasn't a lot of good education going on. My best education was in elementary school. Better education was in elementary school. There was a lot of discipline. I made friends with the assistant principal, and I used to sit in the office with him and do work for him and stuff like that.
Interesting.
And, yeah.
So I find it interesting that you mentioned that the Greek Orthodox Church was there, so there were a lot of Greek Orthodox folk because the first thing that occurred to me was that's a major shift, right? Is that when cities were built, communities and neighborhoods were built in the city around houses of worship. Out in the suburbs, houses of worship came to the people.
Exactly.
Right? And that's a completely different orientation. And so
exactly.
My generation, your kids, your grandkids grew up in a world that wasn't centered on church, right?
Right.
So you made the decision to raise your kids in Deerfield.
Yes.
Why?
Well, when it was time to buy a house, Stan's from St. Louis. To him, Chicago and the suburbs were so sprawling, he couldn't identify with them. So he needed a landmark, and he needed a train line because he was commuting downtown every day. So we started up the North Shore and went from Wilmette to Winnetka to Glencoe to Highland Park, and nothing that we could afford at the time. And we took a left and we found Deerfield, and we bought a house that we could afford, and the rest is history.
Same house you're in now?
No.
I didn't think so.
No. But it's funny because when we moved into our house, Marnie was a month old. And the neighbor across the street came to greet us. And I said to her, "You see this baby? When she's finished with high school, we're moving back to Chicago." So 50 years and then some later, here we are, still in Deerfield.
So when you're done being mayor, you can go move down to the city then, right?
Yeah.
Tell me how you've seen Deerfield evolve.
Well, when we moved to Deerfield, we didn't really know very much about it. We knew maybe two couples who lived there, and they thought it was nice, and it was very different. It was not very Jewish at all. In fact, I think in Alyssa's kindergarten class, it was maybe 6% Jewish, which we didn't realize when we moved here, but it was fine because we met people very quickly and made friends, and mostly with Jewish people. And it was, and then I watched it change. I could see the change between Marnie and Alyssa's kindergarten classes when Chesterfield Builders, who is a Jewish builder, built a subdivision close to where we lived, and Jewish people follow Jewish builders.
See, they don't follow synagogues; they follow builders.
No, they follow builders. And so Marnie's class was much more Jewish because the people who moved there had children her age, younger children rather than older children like Alyssa. And so we watched that evolve, and now it's heavily Jewish. I don't know what the exact demographics are. I've never asked, but it certainly is.
In your personal opinion, what has been gained with that population shift, and what has been lost, if anything, on either side of it?
And now I'm going to sound anti-Semitic.
No.
And I don't mean to, but I think it became much more North Shore, attitude. I want to say, my kids, when they were growing up and they would go into Highland Park downtown and they would come home and they said, everybody is there. All the kids there are talking about their fathers who are the lawyers. And it doesn't matter. My father will get me out of this, blah, 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 blah. But in Deerfield, people weren't talking that way until they did.
Hmm. Okay.
And,
And so it feels different that way.
It does. It feels very different. It feels comfortable in a lot of ways, but very different. Much more privileged, much more higher economic residents.
Hmm. Let me shift that over to Hakafah. So, because you've been here for the 36 years, seeing the arc of Hakafah from its beginning till now, how has it changed and how hasn't it? What are things that you have liked that you have seen evolve, and what are some of the things that you miss?
So you mean the ark, not the ark that holds the Torah?
Right, the arc of the ark. You're right, not the ark. Exactly.
Okay.
Well said. Thank you.
So when in the very beginning it was small and everybody seemed to know each other, and there was a lot of participation in the congregational meetings. It was a new type of structure, and people were very invested in it. And that's true of any type of organization that's beginning.
Mm-hmm.
You get very invested in it. And I got comfortable with the music. I wasn't raised in a Reform temple, so some of the music to me in the beginning was very uncomfortable, but I got used to that, and I got used to the informality of Hakafah, the Sunday school where the parents came with their kids before the kids went to their classes. It was all about investing in Hakafah, and people were invested. So I've seen some of that. I've seen a lot of that change, where people are not as invested as they were, but other people are more invested. So I would say that certainly the music has changed. I've had to get used to that, going from very traditional Reform music to more, I don't know, what should we call the music now, more like la la la.
More campy.
More Israeli, I would say.
More camp, more guitar-esque. Everything that comes with the guitar. Right.
Yeah.
There's a difference. There's a difference between traditional Reform, which, right, traditional is no musical instruments. Traditional Reform is with the organ or the piano, and now you're with the guitar. So no, some people claim it was Reconstruction. I don't know.
Anyway, I'm an adapter, so I think the social justice part of Hakafah has stayed the same. Maybe more people invested in that, which is wonderful. I think you bring a different approach to the synagogue than Rabbi Marx did. As informal as Hakafah was when we began, Rabbi Marx was always a little more formal. And I think you're less formal.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. But that's right. It's
Yeah.
comfortable. It's a happy place, and it's always been a happy place.
So you think about your generation that started it and what Judaism looked like, and you look 36 years later, which is really another generation or two removed. Talk about, in general, your perception of how Judaism has evolved in America, or how this generation is working within the realm of Judaism as different than yours from earlier, if that makes sense.
Well, yes, I think that Judaism, I grew up in this traditional synagogue. I went to a Reform synagogue that was very different. I think Hakafah today is more traditional than it was when it began. And that's great. And I could go either way. At this point in my life, it really doesn't impact me one way or another. I think that my generation, people belonged to a synagogue, and it was not necessarily for their kids to become bar and bar mitzvah, but for their kids to be educated. And I think now more young people are joining for their kids to be bar and bat mitzvah. And when they're done, they're done. And I think that's sad. And I think the whole rent a rabbi approach to Jewish traditions, not just bar and bat mitzvahs, but even weddings and stuff, I think that's sad. I love having a relationship with a rabbi, whether it was Robert or you, Bruce. I mean, I love that. That's important to me.
It's important to me too.
I wouldn't want to be a stranger to it.
So why do you think you said sad? Why is it sad? Why can't it just be different? Why is that sad?
Well, I think it breaks down the institution. I think that Judaism I've always thought that Judaism was very cultural, and it becomes more cultural and less about the formal rites of passage, I guess.
And you think that that's a loss?
I do.
Why?
I think it breaks down the religion. And I'm not a religious person. But I like the structure. I like knowing it's there.
Well, so this kind of bridges, so you're talking about that with religion, and you who are a mayor who believes in structures and institutions to uphold a community. How are you're seeing those break down there as well, are you not? Or do we see this current generation upholding institutions and community life the same way that they were doing in your generation? And is that a bad thing, yes or no, or what do you think?
Well, I think there's less volunteerism than there was, but I think that's because we have dual working families. We're both, I had the privilege, I would say, of being at home and having time to volunteer and being home with my girls and being able to raise them. And, and I felt a need to give back to my community in the best way I could. And I got involved in a lot of different things. And I was able to do that. And it's a luxury today. So somebody has to really feel the importance of it or the need for it. I find that the generation under me, where there were more working moms, if they were volunteering, it was with their kids. So they maybe volunteered in schools and things like that, but they weren't volunteering in government as much. And many of our volunteers now are old.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere. You've been mayor how long now?
It will be 12 years in April.
Get out of here. 12 years?
Yeah, 3 terms.
Do you have term limits?
We do not.
You do not.
But I am going to bow out gracefully.
No. How have you felt? What have you liked about it? How have you felt about being mayor? And why did you decide to do it?
Well, it's a long path. I was a board member at League of Women Voters, and I was asked to lead a local land use study way back when. And so in order to do that, I had to familiarize myself with local government. I grew up in Chicago. I didn't know government. It wasn't a hands-on government. So I started observing the Plan Commission, and I started observing village board meetings, and I thought, oh, this is really kind of cool. So I applied to be on the Plan Commission, and I was accepted, and I spent about 7 or 8 years on the Plan Commission, some of which I was chairman. That had term limitations as a chairperson. And we have a caucus form of government, and somebody from the caucus approached me I had worked on a big project that brought out a lot of people. It was putting a street through when a new subdivision was being in it, and it brought a lot of emotion to. And I chaired that public meeting, and we had to move it to the high school because it was so large. So a couple of people who then got involved with the caucus approached me and said, "Why don't you run for trustee?" And I said, "No way. I'm never going to put myself out there to be elected or to be defeated. Certainly, I said, and I don't know very much about government finance at all." And they said, "You don't have to know everything, but you have a lot of history of land use and blah, blah, blah." And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And then one thing led to another, and I got put up. I did it. I filed and went before the caucus, and I was selected. Hmm. And it was 3 incumbents and me. And at our town meeting, one of the incumbents lost to me. Or not to me, because one of the incumbents had not been slated. But so my first election was unopposed. So I thought, this is pretty simple, until it wasn't. Yeah. And then after I served 6 terms as a trustee, so that's 24 years. It's a lot of time.
It's a long time.
And I know as I got more and more comfortable with it, I always thought, well, it'd be nice to be mayor, but we had a long-term mayor and he was great and doing a good job. And I would certainly never run against him. There would be no reason to. And then one of the new board members ran against him and won. And he served 2 terms. And then when he was done, I ran for mayor. It was my time.
And here you are. Have you liked it?
I love it.
Yeah, what do you love about it?
I do love it.
What do you love about it?
I just like the hands-on feeling a part of the community, having people come up to me and, who I've never seen before, who talk about the village, who either complain about something or compliment something. And it's just a nice feeling to be so involved in it. And there've been very hard decisions that have had to be made, and people haven't always been happy with things I do, but I've always said I don't mind if you attack the issue, but not why I voted that way, because then you're attacking me. I've thought it through, and that's my opinion, and you don't have to agree with my opinion.
So all politics are local, right? Is that true? Even in this political environment, this kind of tense environment, do you feel it on the local level imminently, intimately?
Well, it's gotten more political than it ever used to be. But, I always tell people that your most important vote is in a local election, because that's where you have the most influence. And there are so many people who will vote in a presidential election or a Senate election, but not in a local election. But really, if you think about it, it's where you have the most influence.
Do you consider yourself a patriot?
I do.
What does that mean to you? And how does it manifest itself?
Well, it means, understanding my government, my larger government, my federal government.
So you're the person who understands it. I heard that one person understood it.
Well, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It means taking the time to understand what's happening and the politics of it and the appropriateness of certain things. And we're living in a very different time than I've ever lived in, even through Vietnam War and whatever, when there was divisiveness in this country, but there was always a respect for the structure. There was always this respect for the president, who was the person who sat in the White House. And that's gone. And that is so sad to me. And, and I'm right there with everybody else who feels that we've lost the essence of this country.
So you say that about the president. Do you feel like that trickles over to you? I'm not saying trickle down, because it's not a down. Do you feel like there's a disrespect and a sense of just a distrust of mayors and the like?
There's a suspicion. Definitely, there's a suspicion. And you know, in Deerfield, none of us get paid. The mayor or the trustees, none of us get paid. So nobody's doing it for the money. Everybody hopefully is doing it for the right reason, for the volunteerism, and not just, you know, and not for power, because it's really not power.
It's opportunity to have people call you 19 hours a day.
Or in the middle of the night to tell me that their power went out.
So are you, what's politically, is there something about which you are hopeful in this particular time, looking forward in terms of the political spectrum? I'm not talking about the upcoming election necessarily, but just in general, trend or anything that you feel hopeful about.
Going back to respect, going back to the respect for our democracy and for our country, and that it's a wonderful place and it's being run down and it's being denigrated, and that's so sad to me. So
but you sense that there's you have a hope that that will be restored?
I think it'll take time, but you know, obviously the next election is going to be very important.
Are your grandkids engaged in the world
Very much
politically?
so.
You know, how so? Say a little bit about that.
Well, my grandkids are well, they understand what I do, and they understand that that's part of a democratic process, and they love it. My girls were always embarrassed by it, but my grandkids think it's great. And so they have spent a lot of time with me with that. They're all pretty bright kids and interested, you know, spoken like a grandma, right?
Oh, they're going to give you so much, you know what, for saying pretty. I think they're very intelligent and smart kids.
They are. They are. I try not to brag, but
I'll brag.
Stan and I always say we feel so sorry for all the other grandparents. But we just say that to each other. Some are very interested in history, so that makes them very interested in politics and democracy. Others are just very interested in what they're living in and what they're living through, and you know, they're pretty savvy. They get it. So I'm proud of them.
So looking at their generation, look 30 years from now, what does their political leader look like in your mind?
Well, it won't be Joe Biden.
May he live to be 120.
Right.
But just in general, what do you think the face of politics is in America 30 years from now?
Well, hopefully, we begin to understand that Black Lives Matter. I mean, how many years and years and hundreds of years have we worked on this now? And we're maybe a little further than we were. We're not enslaving people by buying them. And I'm putting that.
Other than trafficking, and I get what you're saying, but yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I hope that we become a more cohesive. I think we have to become a more cohesive country, or we won't exist. We will have, you know, absolute riots, which some of it is happening now. But you know, as poorer people become poorer and more numerous, there's going to be more rebellion. So in order for this country to exist as a democracy in the way it has in the past, it's going to have to get beyond that, and we're going to have to have more equity.
How long do you think it's going to be until there's a woman president?
I hope in another 4 years or 8 years at the most.
You think it's possible?
I do.
What about a non-binary LGBTQ
Yeah, I think that's less of an issue in this country than
Than a
a
woman? You think it's
no.
quicker for someone from the LGBTQ community? It's easier for them to get elected than it is a woman to president?
I don't know if it's easier, but I don't think it's as much of an issue
Oh,
as
interesting.
as yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. Why do you think it's a bigger issue for a woman?
Well, this country was willing. We live in a pretty bigoted country, and
Get out of here. Really?
this country was willing to elect a black man before they would elect a woman, and
Interesting.
I
Yeah.
think that was pretty profound.
Yeah. Yeah. What does the Judaism look like 30 years from now in America?
Well, I'm not going to quote you, but I think Judaism will just plod along as it has in America always. I think there will always be this sense of Jewish people being in too high in controlling positions. There will always be anti-Semitic groups and people,
Hmm.
but as long as we don't continue on with a president who is so biased in his thoughts of anybody who's not like he is, I think it will continue on.
Have in your capacity as mayor, have you been attacked with anything anti-Semitic?
Only the assault weapon ban issue,
It
but
came
that's
out, it was anti-Semitic?
oh yeah, letters, not in a public forum, but not residents,
Hmm.
people from other states, basically.
Have you felt anti-Semitism change over the decades in America, and are you worried about it now differently?
Not no no. I mean, I felt it more when I was in high school,
Hmm.
and
At Austin High School, you felt it? I mean, you said it was more diverse, but you felt it there?
very much so.
Oh,
There was a huge separation,
yeah.
huge
Okay.
separation. In fact, there was one guy I knew in high school who sat next to me. I can remember made some kind of a comment about they, you know, 6 million more than 6 million Jews should have been killed during by
Right.
Hitler. And I looked at him and I said, "You know, I'm Jewish." And he said, "No." And I said, "Yeah, I am." And he said, "I would like to meet your parents because you must be very different."
Interesting.
Yeah.
What is it, the red hair or what?
Red hair, my maiden name was nondescript.
Huh. So you think it was worse back when you were growing up than it is now because of all we're hearing in the media today about and in the Jewish media about how anti-Semitism is getting worse and worse and there's more anti-Semitic acts happening right now. You don't feel it that way.
Well, there are, I mean, it's obvious that there are more, but I think there was always, we're saying there's more, and I'm saying there always were. I think today's media is so instantaneous that we hear more about it. And it's probably no more than it was. I mean, how could it be more than it was in Hitler's Germany?
Well, that's true, but I'm talking about America,
Oh,
right?
in
In
America,
America.
um, you know, I just think that it's we hear about it more. It's more publicized. I think it's always been there. I'm not sure it's more. You know, we're not seeing some of the things we used to see.
Yeah.
You know, we're not seeing as much. We're not seeing as much of Ku Klux Klan that we used to see, and we knew
Yeah,
was
but
out there.
on one level, they feel tame compared to what's going on now.
Yeah,
Right.
really, really.
I hate to say that. I don't mean that seriously, but on one level, no, I don't actually mean that. I take that back. But some of the stuff we see now, which is the violence. I guess the KKK was full of violence too. Oh, I might have to edit that part out. No, I. That's. I mean, yeah. Anyhow, um, Okay, so you don't feel it right now in that way. You think that the current occupier of the White House has been kind of facilitating that for his own ends.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He models that kind of behavior.
How you doing during COVID?
How am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm busier than I ever was with the village. It's, conference calls and Zoom calls and a lot. I meet with the executive staff every morning by conference call. We spend about 2 hours. We then do conference calls with our sister governments, the Park District, the school board, school district, and all of that. We do extra calls with the trustees because we're not running into them or seeing them and that type of thing. So I'm busier than I've ever been. I'm nervous about what's going to happen when I'm done in April
You mean with your life because you're so
with my
busy now?
life and my time. But it's because I don't think we're going to be out and about in like we used to be
Yeah.
for a long time.
We can see you more at Hakafa. You can come do more stuff. You can become president again.
Yeah, right.
I remember our first conversation. I really do.
Do
And
you?
I do. And I remember the interview and I remember quite a bit about that early time. Um, and I remember that you all wanted a woman to be your rabbi. Sorry.
I never felt that.
Yeah.
I've never had that. I always want the best person. If it's a woman, fine. If it's a man, fine. But it should be the best person, and you were definitely the best person.
Oh, I see. I paid you for that. That's why I mentioned it because this is
Yeah,
all
right.
about me. No, that was a really interesting time for y'all, and it was a really interesting time for me. And because I said it in the interview, me becoming a rabbi through JCUA was the hope to someday come back here and work part time at JCUA and part time here. And the fact that that actually became available eventually, and that y'all took me, I'm still pinching myself.
Yeah.
Right, I really am. I still am. It's been so incredibly wonderful, and it's just to have you all in my life, and to have your family, and to watch your family grow, and to participate in that. Right.
Well, Bruce, you had me at Shalom.
Noah, one of Noah's earlier memories of Hakafa is actually going to Spencer's bar mitzvah party. I think he was there. I think he was at Spencer's bar mitzvah party. That was one of those classic ones.
No, there wouldn't be Noah. Noah would have been Mason.
No, but he went. I think he went to Spencer's
Oh, maybe
because he
the whole
remembers
family
him
was
coming down. He
invited.
remembers him coming down on the skates into the
Yeah,
room.
and we were just talking about that the other day. That's so funny.
Oh my God. So I think that's it, Harriet. I just really wanted to catch up with you. I wanted everyone to have a chance to sense, of you and a sense of the history of the congregation and your space in it. It really is such an important space. You were the second president, and you became president because the person who was supposed to become president left, right? They moved.
The vice president left, moved away, and they asked Stan to become. Stan was the treasurer, and they asked him to become president. And he looked at them and he said, "Harriet would be a much better choice." And that's how I became president.
Okay, I want to talk about this a little bit then. And what was it like being president back then at
It was
Hakafa?
great. It was great. Before I was president, I was the head of the education committee.
Uh-huh.
So I worked very closely with Rabbi Marks. And I love that. I mean, it was such a treat for me to be able to do that. So continuing after those 2 years to the next 2 years as being president, I got to continue doing that. And we developed a very, very close relationship, which, we had never had before Hakafa.
Hmm.
We knew each other, but it was certainly not a close, intimate relationship. And then for you to come and continue that and to feel that same relationship, having, spent time with you alone and having spent time traveling with you. And it's just been my pleasure.
Me too. Have you talked to Rabbi Marks lately?
I have.
Yeah. How's he doing?
He's actually doing okay. He says he's reading, he spends his time in his study and he's reading things that he's never had time to read. And he knows he's isolated but he doesn't feel isolated.
Good.
And, you know, he's not playing bridge online. He's not playing chess online anymore. He said he was getting too competitive and too judgy, and he didn't like that. So he's not unhappy.
So you know that when I got here and I would used to meet with him every week, we would play chess. And the first time we played, I beat him.
Oh no.
Yeah. I did. I beat him and it was luck. And he got so upset. This is kind of like, I realized I probably kind of like when you're trying to make a business deal, you should lose by a stroke on the golf course instead of win. He proceeded over the next 3, 4, 5 years, whenever we were together, to utterly destroy me and take such delight in it. So, Harriet, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for sharing yourself, and thank you for sharing Hakafa, and thank you most importantly for giving me the opportunity to come here and be here with all of you, because you do mean the world to me. And I always tell you that I love your family, and I don't tell you enough that I love you as well.
Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
We feel the same about you. So thank you for being our rabbi.
All right, that's it. We'll talk soon. Take care. And that's the end of this episode of Points on the Circle. Take care, everyone.